Kell Brook proved he remains a force to be reckoned with, or at least there's no retirement just yet. This is After the Bell, Mirror Fighting's boxing show in association with Betfair.
Hey is the WBA heavyweight champion of the world!
Float like a butterfly and sting like a bee.
The Mirror brings you After the Bell in association with Betfair.
Welcome to this week's After the Bell. Probably the first major show in the UK this year saw Kell Brook stop Mark DeLuca in the 7th round. Joined by Declan and by George again. We spoke last week about what would be a good result for Kell Brook. First fight in 14 months. Never going to be an opponent that made him look, good necessarily. George, were you happy enough with what you saw?
Yeah, no, I was. I thought Kell Brook went out and did the job. Good that he got 7 rounds in, maybe, because like the fight could get stopped a little bit sooner. DeLuca, I suppose, is what was to be expected. He was tough, but out of his depth. Brook, I think he looked a little bit heavier. Like he's settling into this new weight, and you can see his style's slightly changed, where it's a little bit more solid. Still mechanically throws the shots really well. Still, we'll see how much power he's going to carry at the new weight. Obviously, stopping DeLuca with the jab was really impressive, but it'll probably take a little bit of time to settle into that weight. He said that he made the weight easy, but looking at him in fight week before the weigh-in, I thought it was similar, where his face looked really drawn, looked like he'd taken a lot of weight off, and then looked much thicker and fuller on fight night. So I think he's might be marginally easier, but I still imagine he's a big light middleweight and struggles to make the weight a touch.
So on that, Declan, 147 definitely not going to happen
I
again.
think he's done and dusted there. I think the last fight there was Errol Spence, I believe, at that weight. So that was a good couple of years ago now. So obviously, the longer you leave it, the less likely he's ever going to get back down. I'm pretty sure, like you say, I think he's still got a big cut to make 154, to be honest. So I would think at his age and the options on the table, he's probably thinking, actually, it's probably not much point in me going back down to 47, because, to be honest, he struggled to get big fights there anyway. So it's not even as if he goes down there, he's guaranteed to fight one of the big names. So I reckon he's settled in here. The style was reflecting that. After 14 months, I thought it was a good performance. Like, how many times have you seen someone come back after a layoff and look a bit rubbish, or certainly a bit rusty, back with Dominic Ingle? So there was a lot of little questions he needed to answer, little tick boxes to sort out, and I think he did that. And now we can look ahead to bigger fights. I think it was an impressive performance.
Before we come to specific names, George, I think it seems to be the options now are either a big domestic fight, Liam Smith rather than Amir Khan, or chase that second world title. Personally speaking, I'd rather see him fight Liam Smith. It's a bigger fight over here, and it's a more intriguing fight perhaps than one against the world champions. But could you understand if Kell Brook would rather be able to say in the years to come, I was a 2-weight world champion rather than one?
Yeah, I think so. You wonder, like, what will be his major goal? What will be his drive to get up and go to the gym and do the work? And is he chasing big domestic clashes, or is he chasing more world titles? And I think it's world titles. Certainly it's great to have a huge domestic fight, because that sometimes opens the door for a big world title fight, because so much profile and goes into the fight, you come out with it commercially in a better place. But I'd imagine his primary goal now is to become world champion again. He spent a certain amount of time, without a belt, without being being talked about as a world champion. So that, for me, that would be what I'd imagine his major goal.
Promotionally, Declan, the fight with Liam Smith should be the easiest to make, but I got the sense Eddie Hearn wasn't particularly keen to do it right away. He put a few conditions on. Unless one of them can get a world title shot, he might do it. If he can make it a final eliminator, which looks unlikely, that taking a look at the rankings, then he might do it. I'm not quite convinced he will make it next.
Yeah, I reckon the only way you would sort of swerve a route to a world title and go for that domestic one, if it was like huge and everyone's clamouring for it, which they're just not at the moment, I don't think. Like, speaking as a fan, I'd love to see Liam Smith against Kell Brook. I think it's a great fight, and it's a good one, engaging for fans and stuff. But I don't think it makes a lot of money on pay-per-view, which you'd think it would be pay-per-view based on their current output. don't think it would make a huge amount of money. So then Kell Brook's thinking, well, I could go and not only fight for a world title, but go to America, maybe get that DAZN money, because I'm sure he's motivated by money as well, just like everyone else is, really. I think he'll look at that and think, well, not only is it world title, but it's more lucrative, I might as well do that. So I think there are too many hurdles maybe for the Liam Smith fight. Sad to say, and it's the favourite in terms of the next fight. But I reckon, I just wonder whether, like you say, Eddie Hearn, as the promoter, you would think he'd be talking it up and it would be absolutely pumped towards us now, but it doesn't feel like that's happening. It feels like there's a little bit of hesitancy, and you should probably read between the lines there and think they might go somewhere else with him.
And that would mean, George, that that's a second domestic fight for Kell Brook that hasn't happened. Of course, he's not quite on the same level as the clamour for Amir Khan, but Amir Khan to fight Kell Brook next is 10-1 with Betfair. There's been very little talk. I think Kell Brook shut it down. I don't think Amir Khan's said anything. Are we finally ready to close the lid on that fight, do you think?
Yeah, maybe. I think it's probably just down to who knows what part of the team might be just the block that gets this over the line. Sometimes it's agreeing percentages. Sometimes you might just need to put these sort of fighters on a fixed fee, and it'll take a promoter to take the gamble and be like, right, hopefully this sells enough to make and generate some money. What that fight, even though it might be past its best, has, I feel that the Smith Brook fight is that every man on the street appeal, which is that going to be pay-per-view? Definitely. Would Smith Brook be pay-per-view? Business size, it has to warrant the money that each fighter is going to want, but I feel like the TV networks and the promoters, they'd rather have a lesser heavyweight type fight as a pay-per-view, as opposed to a real good, strong domestic fight. So both them fighters, Smith and Brook, might be America bound, but I like them odds of Khan slipping in there at 10-1, because all it takes is a little gap in the market where a little pay-per-view could slip in, and then all of a sudden it's just someone's lowered their guard, someone's thought, let's just put this to bed, let's just get this fight done, and it's quickly signed up, and it won't take long to sell that fight.
What we don't realise sometimes as well is that the wider public, the wider like sporting public, don't see it like we do, where we're just tired of talking about it. We seem like we've been talking about it for 10 years, but actually the man on the street, the casual fan, maybe isn't that tired of it like we are, and they think, oh, Brook Khan, oh yeah, that's happening, I'm interested in that. And really, when you think about a pay-per-view, you're talking about trying to appeal to the wider public. Forget the hardcore boxing fans, they'll buy it or they won't. It's only a small number of people really in the scheme of things. If you can sell it to the wider public, it's still going to happen. So whether we think, oh, it would have been better 5 years ago or not, I think people will still buy into it. And when you're talking about trying to sell a pay-per-view, I think people will still buy into it, and we'll still watch it, and we're not going to turn the TV off or not turn up. We'll still be in on it. Obviously, it's lost some luster, but because of the options on the table, I think it could still happen. Like you say, 10-1 is still pretty tempting.
It hasn't been talked to death either yet.
Not yet,
because Brook's been off the radar, hasn't been boxing. Khan boxing Saudi again, sort of not. It hasn't been fed down our neck constantly and not been made. And other guys are fighting, what we'll deem the wrong people. Don't take one spark maybe between them two. Who knows?
I mean, you're right, Dick. There are not that many options. If we think Smith doesn't happen, then you're thinking world titles. Patrick Teixeira, WBO champion, but he's got to fight Brian Castano first. I think that fight's April, May. That's 3-1.
But again, they're two names that are not really going to get the juices flowing over here, are they?
No.
Really, or anywhere.
But then I think that's stopped mattering now.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. No.
And so he has a fight coming up. Jason Rosario has WBA and IBF titles, but it looks like he'll rematch Julian Williams. So Brook's going to be in this position where I think he wants to fight, 12 weeks or so. Eddie Hearn thinks more like summer. At some point, he's going to have to, decide. And maybe you could be right about Khan. I mean, Sergio Garcia is there, 6-1 European champion. Obviously, Brook heavily favoured in that one, but we don't want another takeover fight, do we?
No, but that's the problem looking at those names. Like Jason Rosario, that was an amazing win, like the big shock so far of the year. They'll do well to top it. But yeah, like you say, probably have a rematch. So that division's totally in flux, and it's actually made for someone like Kell Brook to settle in and really establish himself again, because he has been off the radar for so long. But you just wonder how he's going to do it. It's not it's not mouth-watering, but the Smith and the Khan fights sort of are. And I don't know if we're talking from a biased perspective because we all like domestic clashes, but 10-1, don't rule it out.
And Brook is actually 3-1 on to win that fight. Khan now 5-2. Which
I suppose it would be at light middleweight now, which is always the suggestion that favours Brook. Actually, you don't really know because Khan, it's not like he's a welterweight anymore. I don't know what he's weighing now, but it's probably closer to like middleweight, to be honest. So that would now suit him. But it's all the same intangibles, all the same questions we've been asking about that fight. Could Khan stay out of the way? Could Brook deal with the hand speed and whatever else? So there's still an appetite for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, earlier on Saturday night, Terry Harper became our latest world champion. She beat Eva Wallström to win the WBC Super Featherweight champion belt. Only 23, Declan, 10 fights in. Wallström's only previous defeat was against Katie Taylor, so pedigree's there. Impressed?
Yeah, very impressed. The following as well she has already. Like you say, at 23, 10-0. Though I think Eddie Hearn tweeted that she was working in a chip shop a year ago. That's the beauty of boxing, what the sport can do for people. She's a star up there already. I think really looking at the wider context just shows what's happened to women's boxing, and it's amazing really, certainly from a journalist point of view, someone covering the sport, that now that is actually an appetite. There's something that people are interested in. That was always the hope, but a lot of people sort of ruled it out. I know Frank Warren wasn't interested at one point in signing women's fighters, Eddie the same before Katie Taylor come on board. So now you've got someone at 23, you're talking about she could have a decade now of her boxing big shows, winning world titles. And also I think the key thing with women's boxing, and was always the question, is are there enough opponents out there, or at least are there ever matches that people can think about and think, I'd love to see that. There's, they're asking for fights, they're clamouring for fights. And at that sort of weight, that super feather, but I'm sure she'll end up probably going up to lightweight, whatever it might be. You're talking about Chantel Cameron, Katie Taylor for a bit more, even younger than Harper, Caroline Dubois, 19, probably you would think turnover after the Olympics if she does well. You're now looking at a sort of a sphere of boxers that people want to see and want to match and want to ask for fights, want to pay for it. And that's a very new thing. It's a new phenomenon, certainly over here with women's boxing. And I think Terry Harper's going to be a trailblazer in that front. Obviously, Katie Taylor really was the first one, the pioneer over here, getting top of the bill and stuff like that. But I think people like Terry Harper's going to carry on flying the flag. And I think it's great for the sport. It's a great, great win. Eva Wallström, clearly very talented. And Terry Harper in her 10th fight beat her up. It was, amazing performance.
And you can't underestimate, George, like local support. As we've said before, so many fighters now are going abroad. Kell Brook still commands a good showing in Sheffield, but he said himself that might be probably will be his last fight in Sheffield. So you need these fighters coming through who you can, maybe not top of the bill, but certainly co-main event, you can just command that following and make sure that actually we can still put on some decent sized shows outside of London.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's always going to be the worry for the boxing fan, is that if a fight seems worth watching, is it going to end up on a pay-per-view channel, or if it can't be made there, is it going to go to another country? Is it going to be in Saudi Arabia? Is it going to be in Vegas or something? So more and more quality Saturday fight nights is what sport will need to survive, and the way that does survive is selling out arenas, having them fighters out there that are just great to watch, engaging with the fans, and fans want to come out, spend the money, and enjoy some live boxing. So, and the women are definitely supplementing that now. Rather than all the names you mentioned now, you've got women, not just standout women fighters who are always sort of in mismatches where they're just beating up on opponents. Now you're getting great fights as well. Amateur boxing gyms up and down the country are full of women, young girls that want to go and emulate the names we're talking about. So it's only going to go from strength to strength.
Okay, next up, we'll take a brief look at this weekend's action as Vincent Feigenbutz challenges Caleb Plant for the IBF Super Middleweight World title. We're light on boxing action this weekend, but one world title fight in America sees Caleb Plant defend his IBF Super Middleweight title against Vincent Feigenbutz. George, of course, your old division. Caleb Plant, undefeated. Where does he sort of fit in, do you think, in the current sort of picture?
Yeah, well, he's a real good, slick, fast, big super middleweight who impressed me late. I thought lots of American prospects, you don't know whether they've just got that missing ingredient to get to the end. But winning the world title, the IBF, against
Uzcategui.
yeah, who's a real handful. Hurt him in that fight, and then sort of from there, I've been waiting for a fight that would give him a lot more profile here in the UK, would take notice. So I thought he's one of the best in the division. He'll definitely give everyone, all the other champions, a run for their money. So this fight here against Vincent Feisenbutz, I haven't seen much of him of late, but I remember he was a real hot prospect for the Sauerland brothers a few years ago now. He challenged for a world title against an Italian lad and lost. And he was expected to win there. But he's a real maverick. Apparently, he's German, but he lives in the caves of Kazakhstan or somewhere. They feed him raw meat. You know, they keep him on a leash. Yeah. So I don't know if that's still the case or they were just using that to sell tickets. But massive puncher, huge puncher. But was liable to getting outboxed. If that's still the case, then someone as slick as Caleb Plant, he will struggle to land on him because he's so hard to hit. But has found his power, and it looks on paper a great fight.
We talk about Callum Smith and Billy Joe Saunders over here, Declan, and obviously they want Canelo Alvarez. Caleb Plant, not so much mentioned, and probably far too risky a fight for either of those two Brits for not a great payday, you imagine.
Yeah, it doesn't really whet the appetite, does it, for a fan or for an average fan? And then for someone like Callum Smith or Billy Joe Saunders to look at it and be like, well, there's literally no upside in fighting him apart from he's got that belt at the moment, but no guarantees of winning it. I was the same with George. I wasn't that sure about him. And then the Uzcategui fight where that was really a sort of coming out party, and you sort of realise what he had, especially against someone who's very heavy-handed and was all over him. And I see this fight being quite similar to that in that he can outbox Feigenbutz, I think, and stay out of trouble, and I think he should win pretty handily on the cards. And then I think there is an argument to say he's one of the best in that division because there's no one really staking the claim at the moment saying I'm the number one here. And, he's just quietly going about his business. He needs, I would say, a big fight. Again, he's never in the stakes for Canelo or anyone like that. And there's a good reason for that, I guess, because he's clearly hard to beat. I see he's 20-1 on. I think that was that sort of tells a story. I don't see him slipping up here. Maybe a couple of years ago, Feigenbutz. I mean, he's only 24. He's had like 35 fights already. But I just wonder whether he's someone who's missing that ingredient at the top level. But he's been given a chance here, and if he can land and get a knockout win, he's right in that division. And yeah, it could be good news for us if he was.
I appreciate you retired, George. But when you watch these fights in your own division, is there still part of your brain that thinks, I'd do this against him, or that would be an interest. This is how I'd beat him, or do you sort of think about how you would get on against the current crop?
Yeah, I mean, you always they don't have to be in my weight division. You watch and you say, right, well, this is how this guy needs to beat him, and vice versa. It's just it's like a coaching element. You sort of your brain is ticking over, and then you compare him sometimes to the other guys in the division. Definitely. Someone like Caleb Plant, who can be very negative when he needs to be, has that ability. It reminded me a bit of Andre Durrell back in the day when he was, probably performing his best, but also had that ability to stink the place out, just to be negative. I'm not sure Caleb Plant is quite on that level, but if he don't want to get hit that night, then it can be hard to watch, and that's why might rule him out of some big fights, and definitely some domestic, some unification fights. But when you think about super middleweights, you've got Callum Smith, who's definitely an established super middleweight. Billy Joe Saunders now, who seems like he's staying at super middleweight. Canelo, is he a super middleweight? Is he not? But if you consider him a super middleweight, he's the best one in the world, I think. And then there's Caleb Plant. I can't really think of anyone else.
If you had a 12-week camp, do you reckon you could beat him?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I did a few rounds sparring Plant out in Vegas. I was in hideous shape. It was after I boxed Edward Goodnecht, and we went to Vegas. I had jet lag. I was fat. I was probably sunburned even in January, and I just couldn't get going. But hit with enough shots to go. I would have put him away.
I'd pay to see it.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Watch this space. In the final part, we'll take a look at what's making the news in boxing this week. So this week saw the announcement of two very good fights, both at the O2. We'll start with Daniel Dubois against Joe Joyce, obviously the heavyweight division. Two different characters. Dubois, of course, the next big thing for quite a while now. Joe Joyce, stellar amateur career, better record on paper, you would argue, in terms of who he's fought. There are, I guess, similarities, George, with yourself and James when you both fought undefeated. Credit must go, first of all, to both guys for taking the fight.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's going to be their biggest fight professionally to date in terms of the build-up, and therefore it will be the hype and pressure that goes with that. They're both, I suppose they are pretty laid-back characters, really, but now there's been thrust upon them to sell a show, and there's been a bit of trash talking that I definitely think both of them are not, what I'm saying, comfortable with. But who knows? Maybe something will get said that they're not used to, and it pushes a button, and away we go. Real interesting fight because Joe Joyce has just a style that don't really fit any other heavyweight out there. He just meanders forward, lets his hands go, easy to hit, but usually breaks people's heart when the level to just not crumble to start with. So that'll be something that Daniel Dubois hasn't dealt with, but. Just such a huge guy, a frightening punch power, makes for a great fight.
I can only imagine Declan Joyce has been paid a lot of money here because I can't really... Beating Dubois doesn't do a whole lot for him, I don't think, other than establish himself as maybe Frank Warren's second best heavyweight. Are you surprised that he's taking it?
A little bit, but I guess, it's probably going to be his most lucrative option at the moment because if you're outside of that top tier of heavyweights, it's not like you have a load of options. But I remember at the press conference when they signed him initially, everyone thought it must be because he's going to fight Dubois, and he sort of said, not really, it's a backward step. At best, it's a sideways step because I'm already beyond that level. But actually, when you look at it and you look at the fight, he's got a lot of credit for taking it, and I think if he beats him, and now is his best opportunity to beat him, actually, based on their ages and whatever. If he does beat him, he can go on. It'd be established here because he's not getting any younger. He's at least 32. He might be 33 now. So it's not even like he can afford to take a year of having a few more sort of quote unquote tune-up fights or whatever. He's ready-made. He's about as close to finished article as he's going to get. So why not throw caution to the wind against Daniel Dubois? Lots of question marks about Dubois still. How's he going to react if he's thrown the kitchen sink at someone and they're still standing there walking towards him? Has Joyce got a chin to take that? Is Dubois' power as good as it looks? Because he's been knocking out second-rate opponents, really, apart from Nathan Gorman, I would say. He's got someone in Joyce who's clearly so tough and big and strong, and he's going to try and suffocate him all night. How's he going to react to that? How's his temperament going to be? He's a very young guy. There's stories that he gets very nervous sort of before training and before sparring. I guess before fights, not a bad thing, but how does that hold up in a fight of this magnitude? I guess it's a totally different vibe now. When you and James were coming up and you're making reasonably serene progress, and then all of a sudden you're in this mad fight that everyone's talking about and everyone wants you're top of the bill and the pressure comes on. I guess it's just hard to deal with, or you have to make a decision how you're going to deal with it.
Yeah, well, you just have to deal with it. You just have to deal with it. Me and Digao ended up just being a bit of a smash. Like it just captured the public's imagination, and there was just such intense rivalry. It wasn't like them old boys where you got to liven them up and try and sell a pay-per-view. We were just good to go. We was on fixed fees. We wasn't on the upside or nothing, but we just still went out there and made it the biggest show we can. And I think in some ways it's a way that, we're looking beyond this show. You want to win and go on to something bigger. Definitely it's what Dubois will be looking at. And Joyce, this is the only big fight he can have being part of the Frank Warren setup, really. So at his age, he's the one who's under real pressure. I think he might even be a little bit older than that. I think he's probably mid-30s almost. Yeah. So he might be looking at this and saying, well, Dubois, as he gets older with more experience, might be more difficult to beat. Maybe this is the time to get him. But it's a fascinating fight for the styles, definitely for the styles. And I'm really looking forward to it.
And also, you look at the names he's already beaten, people like Bryant Jennings and Ustinov and things like that. Again, not world champions, but there's only so many. He's not getting credit for that, really. So he could go and keep beating these guys. No one's still giving him any credit. He's still just about where he is. You could go and fight Manuel Char for the regular belt or whatever it might be, or the European. There are these fights out there, but really, when you look at it, I think this is the best fight for him. And it's not like he's got a better chance of beating Dubois after a couple of fights. It's the opposite. So, and you guess he's going to get well paid. It's a pay-per-view show. Whether that's a correct decision or not, I'm sure it's going to be lucrative for him and for Dubois. So, yeah, credit all round, really.
Joyce, another heavyweight who is changing trainers ahead of probably his biggest fight. He's almost had more trainers than he's had fights now. He started off, I think, with Ismail Salas, then went to Abel Sanchez and Big Bear, then came back with Adam Booth. That lasted, a couple of fights? And now he's gone back to Ismail Salas in Las Vegas. What does it say about a fighter, George, who's now on, their third trainer, but their sort of fourth change of trainer, if you like? What does it say about someone and their preparation, their mindset?
Yeah, I think I run into Joyce as he'd just gone with Adam Booth, and it didn't make any sense to me. Adam Booth's fighters have been getting smaller, and his style of fighting, he likes fighters who are pot shotters. He teaches everyone, you drill, not combinations, punches. You draw the right hand, you draw the left hook, and Joyce you could never do that with, because he has to just swarm you and just keep letting his hands go. But his answer was, I did. Yeah, I can't remember what it was, but say I did defensive work with Salas, and then I did, head movement with Abel Sanchez, and now I'm going to do, something else with Adam Booth. And I was kind of thinking, it's not exactly how it works. You find a trainer who can sort of teach you everything and work with your attributes that you do well and develop them, and then master things that you don't do so well. I didn't think the Adam Booth trainer, boxer, would last forever, just for the fact that Booth's style of training would never fit Joyce's style of fighting. And you saw a little bit of it coming out in his fights, and it wasn't really working for him. So I'm not surprised he's moved on. But maybe he's got to that point where he doesn't want to keep changing trainer. He just wants to go back to what he feels familiar with and what he feels comfortable with. So I'm happy that he's done that ahead of this big fight, as opposed to going to a brand new trainer who might want to stamp his own mark on Joyce to try and change him, and then therefore he spends the whole camp trying to learn something new that actually has no bearing effect on what's needed for the Dubois fight. So I think probably best decision, really.
For what feels like a 50-50 fight, actually the odds suggest it's not. But if we have Dubois 2-7 and Joyce 5-2, surprised by that?
A little bit. I did a poll on my Instagram, and it was like 98% people voted Dubois to win. So I think that public all over Dubois, because you would be, because of how he's been built, and people don't know too much about Joyce, even given his Olympic silver medal and the names he's beaten already. So if you fancy Joyce, there's definitely money to be made. To be fair, there's that's a sort of bet where I think it's clearly too generous. So you might as well just get on it anyway to cover yourself. Even if you think it's a 50-50, well, you get 5-2 on the other guy in that sense. I think it's a great price for him. I think it's closer than that. But there's so many question marks about the whole thing. Really, is Dubois' power as big as we think? And can Joe Joyce really withstand that sort of onslaught's probably the wrong word, but he's going to get hit a lot, I think. Whether it's constant, I think he's going to get hit a lot. So, I think I can't see it going the distance. I don't see it being a Kell Groves points decision either way.
He's not going to run around the back foot and try and make a points decision.
No.
In a sign of the times, of course, it will be on pay-per-view. And I understand the model. I understand that they need to be paid big money, and that's how you make the money. You can't just put it on for free. But if someone had said to you 5 years ago, there'll be a fight between, if not these two people of that ilk, what would you have thought about it being on pay-per-view?
I got probably a biased opinion because I ended up with the Gal British title pay-per-view. He was supposed to be on the undercard of a Cleverly World title fight, but we stole the show. So, I'm a bit biased. But I think this is one of the best heavyweight fights we've got. And if you look at the other, they're talking about Chisora versus someone on pay-per-view. Usyk is a phenomenal talent, pound for pound, one of the best fighters out there. But does that fight, on par with Dubois Joyce? Dillian White, who has been the A side of pay-per-view fights for a couple of years now. Never boxed for a world title. Probably never will do. Who knows? You know, it's not on the immediate radar. And we've seen Dave Allen versus Lucas Brown headline a pay-per-view show. I mean, it's a sign of the times. The sign of the times. I like this fight. I'll definitely pay for it. Yeah. Definitely pay for it. I think it's definitely the best that BT can come up with at the moment. And, you know, the build-up might not be amazing in terms of the chat, because neither of them two are built for chatting and selling fights. But the actual fight on paper with the styles at the O2 Arena, I think it's going to be a real big sell. I hope it does real well.
Do we just have to accept it?
Yeah, I think we kind of do now. And it's boring, isn't it, moaning about it, because it's one of those, it's just a product. If you don't want to buy it, fine, don't buy it. And if enough people vote with their feet or with their fingers, as it were, then, you know, eventually this will stop happening. But the fact is, it still remains the most lucrative option for fighters, who are the ones risking themselves getting in there in the first place. And if they're on a split deal or whatever it might be, then they'll get stung if it doesn't sell very well. So eventually it sort of even itself, the market will even itself out. But I think a fight like this is going to capture enough attention for that still to be better than a normal BT fight night where they just won't get paid as much. And it's not good. It's damaging to the sport in the sense that how many million people watched Nigel Benn against Chris Eubank on, you know, the rematch on ITV? Millions and millions. Millions of people aren't going to watch this. You're talking about a couple of 100,000 probably. So, you know, that's not good for the sport. You want as many eyeballs on it as possible, see a fight of this quality, but they're the ones that are getting punched. They're the ones who want to get paid for it. Long term, I think it evens itself out a little bit, but I think we're in the era now where anything good just goes on pay-per-view. There was a time when a big fight needed pay-per-view just to make it happen. Like Mayweather-Pacquiao needed to be on pay-per-view because of the money it generated, otherwise it's not going to happen. Now, I think the waters have muddied a little bit. It's not like that. It's not like they couldn't have made this without it. Or there's certainly other pay-per-views where you think they could have easily done that pay-per-view, that main event without it. But the boxers would rather take the gamble and say, okay, I'll have a split of that pay-per-view. I fancy myself to be able to sell this one, back myself. I'll get paid on that percentage rather than taking a flat fee or whatever it might be. But it doesn't do any good moaning about it, to be honest, because they still just keep doing it, don't they?
The market's changed so much now. It's so much. It's easier to pay for things. People are happier to part with money. You got ITV that were doing pay-per-views. You got BT. You had subscription through Box Nation. You've got Sky that do pay-per-views, and there's probably more out there that I've forgotten to mention. If the fight's worth paying for, you'll pay for it. If the process is easier, then you're much more likely to do better numbers. Yeah. That's why Sky do great numbers, because they've got everyone's details already. BT will need probably this will do half the amount of buyers on BT than it would with Sky. Not because Sky necessarily will profile it and bill it better. It's just, sadly, that's the way it is, you know, and probably upset BT in the process. I mean, me boxing Eubank on ITV done mega numbers, because it was such a big fight, and each of us had people were kind of getting their head around the process of booking the fight on ITV, but they put me and Jamie Cox on pay-per-view, which I thought we was going to go out on free-to-air ITV and really build my profile. Like that was what I signed up for. That's what I was hoping for. But sadly, the TV networks don't get the revenue in to pay out for the license fee anymore. So you're talking about, you know, Nigel Benn versus Eubank. ITV would have paid millions for that. You know, in comparison now, you're lucky for them to cover production costs, because their production costs might be $100,000, and that's usually where and whereabouts it is, because people don't want to pay for advertising anymore, or however they used to generate the money. So everything now has to be subscription based.
But if they put you against Cox in the quarterfinal on normal free to air, loads of people would have seen that fight, would have seen you do the business and gone, when the pay-per-view comes along for Eubank, gone, wow, yeah, Eubank, I know him and I know George very well, I'll pay for that. So they're sort of like they're shooting themselves in the foot.
That was my argument.
Yeah.
That was my argument. But you're right. And I think it must be much harder to roll the dice on them sort of decisions when you've actually got to put your hand in your pocket and pay for it. Maybe they don't have that pot of money to start with for the investment. I mean, there are companies like DAZN who have put $1 billion into boxing and then hoping to recoup that over however many years. And who was on here last week saying they're going down the line of YouTube boxing and other things just to get the subscription numbers up to cover themselves. Boxing was, is on Sky. It's a sport that generates its own money because the pay-per-view pays for the Saturday fight nights, But they've also pulled the plug on pay-per-view. I was boxing on Sky shows, Sky chief supports on David Hay when they said, right, we're having a break now, and it didn't come back until Froch Kessler, because there wasn't an appetite there for it. Boxing's big at the moment, but it's only big as people now. It's only big for as long as people are willing to pay for it. So there might come a point where the pay-per-view starts to slow down a bit, or they're more selective, or they just try and deliver more shows. I just hope that we're in a situation where we can continue to give good quality Friday, Saturday fight nights on free to air as such. Because otherwise, if you just put all the great fights and stack them on pay-per-view cards, it might not last forever. Who knows?
Well, that leads me to another complaint, if you don't mind. Please indulge
You're
me.
full of them.
Another fight that's been announced, Josh Kelly against David Avanesian. An excellent fight. Let's just make that clear. Very good fight. One that was supposed to happen a year ago. Josh Kelly got ill, pulled out. It's going to headline the O2 at the end of March. So that is a Saturday night fight night. But I don't know who's going to that fight. And if that's the headline, the undercard's not going to be stacked. Is the quality of Saturday night fight nights, and let's not just stick to Sky across the board, are we just spoiled now? And actually, when you look back 10 years, it's still way better. Or has the standard slipped? Again, the Kell Brook card didn't exactly excite me.
Yeah, I mean, this fight, Kelly against Avanesian is a better fight than Kell Brook against Mark DeLuca in terms of, as a boxing fan, what you want to see. But it's still, you're right. It's surprising me that that's headlining the O2, particularly considering Josh Kelly's from Sunderland. So it's like, why is he not fighting up there? Why are they putting him down here in London? I don't know what the reason is. I don't know if they'd already booked the O2 because of Chisora Usyk or something, if they already had that date and they wanted something on it. It's a great fight. It's a really good fight. And it's one that Josh Kelly could lose as well. It's not, it's a real 50-50. And also then the pressure's on him a lot. He's got to headline the show in a city he's not from. He might not think about ticket sale. He ain't got to sell tickets maybe, but it's still on him. The whole pressure, the spotlight's on him. Maybe he'll thrive under it. But this to me seemed like a chief support, like it was supposed to be, I believe, on the Kell Brook Michael Zarafa show, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So before he got ill. So they already knew where they were sort of trying to pitch this one, and now to end up headlining the O2, it's just surprising. I guess they're going to pull out stops on the undercard, I don't know, but is it a sign that the standards are slipping? I'm not sure, because the fight is great and it's one that I really want to see, but it's not quite, doesn't get the juices flowing like other fights we've had on the standard Saturday fight night.
Is it not better, George, that for the fighters even, that it's in a smaller venue that they know will, if not sell out, be close to sell out, rather than a 20,000 arena where you've got the top bit closed off?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm not really looking at it as a negative, to be honest, because if I was Josh Kelly and I'm headlining a huge arena like the O2, there might be a little bit of nerves in the build-up, whether it's going to sell well or not. And I was really involved in that sort of process, so yeah, it did upset me a little bit when some shows didn't sell out. But it's a great fight. I've already gone on about moaning that all the good fights might end up on pay-per-view cards. It's not. It's a Saturday fight night. It's at the O2 Arena. It'll look good regardless on TV, whether it sells out or not, and that's the promoter's fault. And fair play to Matchroom there, where they are probably rolling the dice a little bit with they have to pay a large venue hire costs for the O2, and knowing that this fight doesn't get anywhere near selling enough tickets for an O2 Arena. But if you want to put on a show in London, you go, there's no venues. You got the Copper Box, which is sort of a bit out in the sticks, that mediocre size venue. But other than that, it's literally you'll call to Wembley Arena or you'll call to the O2 Arena. Your call shows are finished, really. You might get the odd next gen show on that's there, which is a Thursday night, which they almost downplayed to show that it's something else, and this is where you're aspiring to be. I've been waiting for that crop of Olympians to sort of get developed and start pushing them in the tougher fights, but also more importantly, give them the main event status and the correct, billing in the process, in the build up, make people excited about the fight and build their name. So you've got Josh Kelly, Joshua Buatsi, Lawrence Okoli, all these guys who are on the cusp now of big fights, maybe even world title fights in the next year or two. Lawrence Okoli, I believe, is actually in line for a world title fight. So that might be a fight that ends up part of that card. There's definitely going to have to be a strong undercard to go with it, but I'm pleased. I like the fight, and I'm happy that it's at that it's not part of a pay-per-view. You're right. I think it might have been the O2 might have been booked out for maybe a Chisora or something along those lines, and this just fits the bill. But Matchroom will make it look good on TV, and it's a good, definitely a good thing for boxing right now. Josh Kelly's in a real tough fight though, so I'm sure he doesn't need any distractions, but he might thrive under this. He might love it that he's at a big arena headlining, and this is time to shine. But he's had a few wobbles of late. Don't even know if there's subpar performances, but fights where he's really struggled. So maybe it's a step too far for him right now. Who knows?
Well, I stand corrected once again. We'll obviously talk plenty about that fight in the weeks to come. Betfair have priced Avanesian as a favourite 4-5 on. Josh Kelly is evens to win that one. That is all for this week. Join us next week where we'll take a look ahead at the big one, the rematch, the heavyweight rematch indeed, between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder.